Thank you so much for being with me today to tell me about your experience being part of the Serbian diaspora in the United States. First, can you tell us about yourself? What is your name? Where were you born? And where did you grow up? And then where in the Balkans is your family from?
Thank you for inviting me, first and foremost. This is such an honor. My name is Desanka Malinović. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, so I've been here my whole life. And then my parents are from, well, my dad's from central Bosnia, and then my mom she was born in Crna Gora, she was born in Montenegro, but then she grew up in southern Serbia before moving to Šabac for, like, her adolescence, her teenage years. And that's where my parents met.
So true Yugoslav style.
Yeah, very Yugoslav style.
Okay, so why did your family decide to move from the former Yugoslavia to the United States?
Because of the war, as I mentioned, my dad was from central Bosnia, so there was a lot of conflict there already, and they first went to Serbia as refugees. One of my aunts on my dad's side married her husband, who was from Šabac, and then when the war started, all my dad's side basically went over to her house, and that's where they stayed before they came to the U.S., and that's how they met. My mom didn't come to the United States until later when her and my dad met, so she didn't necessarily come because of the war, but I think it's a byproduct still.
How would you describe the Serbian community in Arizona? I know I'm also a part of it, but I would like to hear about it from your point of view. How would you describe it?
I think for a long time, I didn't really see it, like, as being that much different from, like, you say, like, my school community or anything, because there's so many different types of people. But I think one thing that does stand is we are very connected as a group. Like, I feel like, at least with the, like, group that came here right after the Yugoslavian war, because I do think there's that kind of, like, divergence between, like, the people that came here after World War II and, like, the community that's there, because I think they're a little bit more separated. But in terms of the community that came here right after the war, I think there's still a lot of interconnectedness, whether it's, like, through the children and through the folklor programs, or it's just because the parents know each other. I think it also has to do with all the adults kind of being from the same area. A lot of them did come from, like, central Bosnia or from eastern Bosnia. They're all from the same region, so I think that has to do with a little bit of the connectedness. For the most part, I think I don't know, there's a lot of, like, traditional aspects of the community still. I don't want to say conservative, because I don't think it's necessarily, like, conservative, like, in a political manner, but I do think it's very traditional in terms of, like, some of their viewpoints of, like, oh, like, you should still live with your family. Like, I feel that's one of the things that I've experienced a lot in terms of that, is, like, moving away for college is, like, a huge, like, what? Why would you do that? Like, I think those are the kind of ways that, like, that, like, kind of, like, tradition and, like, the lifestyle from over there is, like, kept here.
Yeah, no, that, like, moving away for college, because I did that, and now I'm living at home because I decided to go, and then I came back. I definitely noticed that a lot in high school with my dad, for example. He'd be like, well, in my former country, you stay at home with your family. You stay with your family in the same place until you get married, and even then, you stay with your family. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not there now. But yeah, it's interesting because there is that sense of tradition that continues, and that we as diaspora members, as first generation, we have to, I guess, we have to handle. There's, like, a little little internal conflict with that.
Oh, for sure. I think my experience with that is my parents always joke around, like, well, we'll move with you, you know, because I'm an only child, so they're just like, well, we'll move with you, even if you go somewhere away, like, we'll come with you, which, you know, it's cute, but there's a part of you that's, like, I guess, like, the more American aspect that's like, I want space, yeah. Or, like, I think it's interesting because there is a lot of push to be, like, almost, like, I don't know if homogenous is the right term, but there's, like, a very, like, strict thing of, like, oh, we keep to ourselves, and, like, that's where I think there's also, not a level of toxicity, but I think it's just, like, cultural difference, right? Because over there, it's still, like, you marry another Serbian, you do this, and then it's, like, here, they feel like there's a lack of control over their kids, and, like, I think that's also a huge disparity between, like, the generation of immigrants that came here versus, like, we're, like, the diaspora generation, like, my generation that's here. Because it's, like, here I'm just more, like, if it's a good person. I'm not exactly, like, seeking out to marry a Serbian. I don't think that's, like, the first thing. But I think that's another aspect where it's, like, they really want to kind of keep close. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've noticed growing up. That's really interesting. It's, like, how much are we able to assimilate? How much is enough? How much is too much? And then I guess on that note, my next question would be, like, on tradition and then, like, keeping your culture alive in your daily life. What are some little things you do in your daily life that you would say are distinctly Balkan or Serbian, for example?
I think that there's always, like, the classics, like, oh, we take our shoes off when we go into the house. Things like that. But Another, like, thing that I think is very strictly adhered in my house, at least, is, like, observing, like, saint days. Like, whenever it's a sveta, it's like, God forbid I put the laundry to wash. Like, those are the little things where it's like, oh, wow, that really is, like, cultural. Like, I guess that's more of the religious aspect of it, but I still think it plays an effect, because, like, now I have to plan my, like, laundry schedules and, like, when I do this and when I want to cook dinner. I've noticed it a lot now that I think I'm more, like, leaning to this just because it's, like, more prevalent in my life right now. But, like, with, like, college applications and stuff, that's where I feel like there's a lot of, like, things that are very distinctly Serbian. Because, like, a lot of the things that I'm explaining to my parents sometimes don't make sense to them because that's not how it was done over there. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's where I see it, where it's, like, this disparity of, like, oh, well, or, like, now I'm in my senior year and explaining, like, maybe, like, senior assassins or some of those, like, American traditions. It's like, well, why would you do that? Why would you want anybody knowing where your address is? So I think that's where it's like, oh, those are very distinct, like, Serbian mentality or Balkan mentality towards, like, aspects of life here.
I mean, yeah, like, education, that's a big thing. My dad, no matter how many times I explained to him while I was in high school what an AP exam is, he never understood. He also, this is something that we, you know, went back and forth about in high school, still in college. It's like, why are you doing all these extracurriculars?
Yeah,
extracurriculars.
Like,
you're doing too much. All you need to do is go to school and that's it. And I'm like, well, Tata, that's not how it works here. Like, you have to have an internship. You have to start this club. You have to be involved in this thing, that thing. And he was like, no, you don't. You'll still be able to get a job.
Yeah, with my dad, it was like, he couldn't wrap his head around, like, the fact that, like, I always explained it to him like this. I was like, do you know how many students in the United States have all A's? Like, that's, like, in the millions. Like, that's not even, like, a qualification at this point. Like, that's not, like, a nice, like, oh, wow, you have all A's. Like, that's not, you have to take into question, like, what classes you're taking, what, like you said, extracurriculars. So that's the way that I kind of navigated that, was, like, explaining that that's not unique enough as it was over there, you know? Like, it's not that big of a difference. And even now, I think sometimes that's something that I notice that are, like, not even that he's, far from that, like, ashamed. I think it's just, again, like, confused, because sometimes, like, he'll be explaining, like, to my aunts or my relatives, like, oh, where's Desa? Because, like, I sometimes can't make it to, like, family functions because I'm always doing something for school. And, you know, it's not, like, in a passive way, but he just doesn't know how to explain it. So I think that's also where there's a disparity, where it's, like, also him conveying that to my other relatives is, like, so hard.
So I guess my next question is more about folklore. So can you speak about folklore? We did it together.
Yes.
And how it helped you connect with your culture growing up. I know for me, it really helped me, like, you know, understand more about my culture, my history, why, I don't know, like, these folk dances are so important. So I guess I want to hear more about, from your perspective, like, how it might have helped you connect with your culture, because I know that's, like, a really big thing for us diaspora kids. You go to folklore, you go to the folk fest, you go to the surf fest, you go dance, you go meet. That's how you meet a lot of your friends.
Oh, for sure. I think that last point that you just said is, like, the most important thing, is how many people I met, you know? And not everybody was, like, a close friend, or, like, that I can say that I maybe, like, stayed in a friend group. I know some other people did. Like, that's where their closest friends came from, but I think it just introduced me to a lot more people that, like, shared my cultural heritage, or just the same experiences, like, of traveling to, like, California for Folk Fest. Like, it just kind of developed that sense of community. To me, like, folklore, or, like, just, like, traditional dancing now has become, like, such an, like, I love it so much. And not just, like, for Serbian, like, culture or Serbian folklore. I think it's just opened up my appreciation for cultural dances from across the world. Like, I think it's almost become, like, a hobby. Like, I just love watching, like, YouTube videos of, like, cultural dances from other places because of how important folklore is for the diaspora community, like you said here. I think it's also really cool because folklore isn't just, like, dancing. A lot of them are stories, and it's, like, a story through the expression of dance. And I think that's really cool because, you know, when we were younger, maybe we didn't understand all those, like, stories that they would try to tell us, but I think the dancing was a way to kind of, like, envision what life over there was like. Obviously not when our parents were raised, because, like, that's not that recent, you know what I'm saying? They're, like, my dad wasn't wearing, like, a noshnya, but, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it kind of gave me the idea of, like, oh, what was life over there like? It also helped me, because you were surrounded by the music, and then when I first started doing it, like, it was very, like, you'd go to veronauka, like, the religious classes, and then you would go to folklore. So I think that also helped because it kind of gave me a deeper understanding of, like, you know, like, the religious heritage. Because something that I found, like, now, this is kind of going off to a tangent, but I think it's, like, worth saying.
Go for it.
There's a lot of value in the religion, especially for the former Yugoslavian countries and the former Yugoslavian people, you know, because not that necessarily that's one of the main dividers, but that is one of the main differences and like the things that make each nation or each ethnic group unique. But I think it's because our parents were raised under communism, where it wasn't necessarily not obviously it wasn't promoted. Obviously it was allowed, but it wasn't promoted, and that religious heritage and religious knowledge wasn't like it didn't run really deep, and our parents weren't really introduced to it. But there's still a real relevance to the religion. I found like now more and more, like obviously I mentioned earlier, like, oh, we strictly observe saints, but then as I kind of got older, I would ask my mom, well, what is this saint? You know what I mean? And a lot of the times the answer would be like, well, I don't know. You're just not supposed to do this. So I think that's an interesting like kind of like perspective on it, where it's like the religion is important and like it's something that makes all of us different or whatever, but very few people have like a deep, not deep, but even just like a basic knowledge of a lot of it. And I think that's an interesting perspective, like not a lot of people explore, even like consider, you know what I mean? So like, oh, I'm Serbian Orthodox and you're a Muslim, but do we really know about our religions like individually, or is it just something that we can say that's like different between us? So I think veronauka helped me with that, where like I kind of got an introduction to it other than just like, oh, this is just what my family does.
On that note, because I mean, you know, like veronauka, everything, folklor was all in Serbian. So having grown up in a multicultural environment, speaking 2 languages, English and Serbian, how do you perceive the intersection of language identity in your life?
For a very long time, and I think this kind of goes back to, from my personal experience, I'm not saying that this is like the experience of everybody, but I know personally, when I was growing up, it was very strongly pushed to just be Serbian, like almost exclusively, because like I think it was out of the effort of my parents. So that when I was younger, they didn't want to even give in a little bit to like being like, oh, you're American, you know. It was just for like a lot of my like formative years, I think it was just like Serbian, you know. Like I think to the point where like this is so like I don't understand how like 8-year-old me came to this conclusion, but when I was in elementary school, I was like convinced that my parents didn't want me to be friends with like American kids. Like I don't know where that came from. Like that was never their intention. I think it was just goes back to that thing where it's like they're like, don't speak like English. Or when me and my friends would hang out like in the car or whatever, my dad would joke and like we'd start speaking English, my dad would joke, he'd be like, in this car you can only speak Serbian and Chinese, and we obviously don't know Chinese, so we'd have to speak in Serbian, right? So like there was a lot of push to be exclusively Serbian almost, and I think there was a part of me that was like, okay, well, I can't give into that American identity, if you will. But then as I grew up, I realized that there really are like things that from my perspective are different than my parents, or even like from my cousins in Serbia. Do you know what I mean? Just because I am raised here, I spend most of my day in an American school, you know, with American friends. So I think as I've gotten older, I've been able to accept like, okay, you're not like straight out of the cello like in Serbia. Like you need to like I had to like do a little reality check. Like, okay, like you're not gonna like marry some like Serbian like fresh off the boat. Like, you know what I mean? Like I just kind of had to come to terms, or like you're not gonna move back to Serbia and live there. You know what I mean? So I just kind of had to accept that dual identity, and now I think I'm finally at a place where it's like, okay, I'm Serbian, but I still think I have a lot of American perspectives on, like, whether it's certain issues or, like, lifestyle choices. Like, going back to the thing that we were talking about, like, moving away for college or living on my own. I think those are the aspects where I lean in a lot more to my American identity.
I think, like, as we get older, we realize, like, you don't have to be one or the other. Like, you are what you are. Like, you can be both. So I think that's something, like, personally I've also realized as I've gotten older, like, I can be both.
Exactly.
I don't have to exclusively be one or the other. Yeah. We kind of are, like, moving between 2 different cultures. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that last point that you just touched on, I used to see that almost as, like, a negative thing. Because I used to see it, like, or I treated the perspective as, like, not having a nation or a culture, if you will, right? Like, you just felt like you were right in between. But now, I've been able, like you said, kind of reframed my viewpoint to be, I can just shift between the 2 cultures, you know? I always say, like, nobody will know that I'm not American until they read my name, right? Like, if my name was, like, maybe, like, Emma, like, I'd maybe even get away with it even more, but, like, Desanka's a little, like, out there. Like, that's a little, like, in your face. But, like, in Serbia, like, I might mess up a couple of words, but... this is in no way to like brag or whatever, but most of my family like over there are like, oh, like you can't even tell that you're from over there, because my parents did really push for me to learn Serbian like fluently as much as possible. So like you said, I can navigate my way through both. And even like the language aspect, I know there's a lot of hate around like mixing two languages, but I love speaking in Serblish. I love Serblish.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
But on that note about language, can you tell us about your project, Engleski Jezik Objašnjen?
Yes.
And where you got that idea for your project?
Yes. So Engleski Jezik Objašnjen is an organization that I just started this year to help like the Serbian diaspora community, especially that older generation that came here after the Yugoslavian Civil War and never had a chance to formally learn English. But again, it is so necessary in every aspect of your life that to provide English services, whether it's actual language classes that go over specific subjects that are necessary for everyday life, but also tips, tricks, online resources, not resume builders, but resume templates and email templates. Because, like you said, with the question about the inspiration, my sophomore year of high school, my dad transitioned jobs. He is an electrician and he worked like just really manually before that, and then this new role that he took on was a lot more administrative, and he started needing to use emails and send emails. He has to write these like safety reports for like I remember he had to write a safety report about forklifts. So me and him had to sit down in the middle of the night and like write about how to operate a forklift. But that, like, beforehand, I think I was a little bit almost ignorant to how little my parents knew English. And I think part of it was when I would make jokes and stuff, they didn't want to tell me that they didn't get it, so they just, like, go along with it. So I think I kind of lived in this kind of, like, I don't want to say delusion, but that's the only word that's coming to my mind of, like, oh, my parents know it. Like, they get around, obviously, but now, especially with how necessary technology is for literally every career, every aspect of life, I think that's what kind of brought it to my attention, especially my dad's transition. I was like, wait, like, he actually, like, he can't spell the best, and he can't, like, read as fast as I thought he would read, or he can't, like, make a PowerPoint presentation. It was things like that where I was like, oh my god, this isn't, like, just a small little issue. Like, this is, like, genuinely something that is adding so much stress to his life, and that's in turn adding stress to me and my mom's. Like, it was just a really big issue. I mentioned before we started recording, but my school is an IB school, an International Baccalaureate, and one of the things that you have to do during your sophomore year is do a personal project, just like a little project that you make that helps your community but is also, like, related to you. And I originally wanted to, like, make a nošnja, because I was like, that'd be so cool. And then I was, like, thinking about it. I was like, wait, no, like, what if I make a little translation book for my parents? And that's where that idea started. I just made it, it's nothing, like, too, like, wow. But it was, like, going over, like, pronunciation of letters, homophones and homonyms, and, like, contractions, because those are the things that I noticed my parents struggled with. And then out of that, your senior year, you have to complete a CAS project, Creativity Action Service, and I was like, wait, why don't I make, like, an organization and take this, like, to another step? So that's where what I've been doing so far. And I want to kind of make it not just English classes where it's like you're teaching the language, because a lot of people don't need that. Mm-hmm. They've been living here long enough. They have experience using conversational English. It's just those tiny things that are kind of in their way of, like, reaching their full potential or kind of living a stress-free life. So I think that's where I'm trying to take this project specifically.
I really love your idea for your project, which is why I've been so excited to help you out with it however I can, and I think that's really important. I mean, like, for example, my baba, she's lived here since 1998. Girl does not know English.
Yeah.
Her life would be so much easier if she had learned it.
Especially with what you touched on with your baba coming here in 1998. I think that is where they obviously couldn't know it at the time, but I think at that time, or even, like, early 2000s, I'd even say up to 2010, we weren't that reliant on technology. And, like, people, like, I have a tetka, like your baba, who, like, you go to her house and it's only, like, Balkan on the TV. Yeah. And it's, like, literally, like, you walk in and it's, like, a portal is shifted into, like, Serbia. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I don't want to say got away with, but they've navigated through their life just kind of, I'm trying to remember, like, my IB psychology terms when they, like, don't want to integrate into the new society at all. But, like, they totally, like, she's, like, completely separated from, like, any American culture. And now she has to rely on her daughter, or, like, she has to rely on, like, her grandchildren, whatever it may be. And I think they got away with it because at that time, you didn't need technology. It wasn't as necessary. You maybe only needed it when you went to the grocery store. And even then, they found a way. I don't know how they found a way, but they almost found every other way except to, like, learn the language fully. So, but now that's where, like, there's this huge gap now where it's, like, self-checkout and, you make doctor's appointments online now, like almost exclusively, or like if you want to schedule like a vaccination, anything, like now it's all online, and that's where you have to know the language, you have to be able to read.
How has it been for you to connect with members of the Serbian community in building this project? I know, for example, you've promoted it at our Serb Fest in November. I took one of your business cards at Cafe Balkan. So how has that been for you, like with the outreach and building this project?
I think it's been really positive. It's taught me a lot, not necessarily even about the Serbian community, but a lot of it is just reaching out. Like, a lot of getting any project starting is just, like, having the guts to reach out. Send that email, send that message on, like, whatever. Like, a lot of people will respond to you if you just make the first step. I think that was a lot of the things that blocked me from the beginning, was like, oh, well, will anybody read it? Even when I reached out to you guys and the members to reach out, there was a huge fear in me where I was like, nobody's gonna want to participate in this. Nicolina knew about it beforehand, and so before I sent that message, I kept texting her. I was like, this is gonna go horribly. Like, I feel like nobody's gonna respond. But that's what it taught me. But then it also taught me how receptive the Serbian community has been. Going back to what we said at the beginning, like, there is a large level of interconnectedness and a lot of support for one another. And I think that's been a very, very positive surprise. It was a lot of reaching out, but it showed me that, like, people are here and people want to see the youth succeed. My dad was like, be ready for people to be abrasive or not open to the idea. But so far, I've kind of seen the opposite of that, where people have been very open and supportive and reaching out and wanting to see it succeed. So this is something you're working on as your senior project in high school, and this is what we're working on for our senior project in college, and this is something that we're going to continue beyond graduation. So my next question is this project you see yourself continuing beyond high school? Oh, for sure. I think when I first started it, I was still in that kind of like, oh my god, I'm going to get this done within 3 months. Like, I'm going to have all the material ready. Because you get so excited and you think you're just going to have, like, every single day completely free to work on it. And obviously that's not the reality. So I think through that, I've learned that this is, if I truly want this to make the difference that I'm hoping to make, I need to take it slow. And I need to allow it to, grow naturally and not force things, not try to rush things, because then nothing's really going to happen well. So I definitely want to continue it after school, after high school, and like well into college. I think that's going to be even more of a space where I can really see it blossom, because if I go to a university that does have like a Serbian, like a Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian class, or a professor even that I could reach out to, that's where I really want to make those like bonds, because that has been the biggest challenge thus far, is like finding a professor, finding some like reliable, credible figure that can read over all the material, because I always had, even with my parents, I had to be a little they were real with me as well. They were like, hey, we went to school for this stuff like 20, 30 years ago. Our Serbo-Croatian isn't going to be perfect. So that's been the biggest challenge. So I definitely want to expand it into college, where I can really, really like concentrate it on those lessons and all those things. So
when's the last time you visited the Balkans?
I visited summer of 2022. My cousin had a wedding, and that's when we went. We went from like, it was funny. We left the country on July 4th, like on 4th of July. I thought that was really ironic. Yeah. But and then we came back like August 1st. I had to go to school the very next day. It was not a fun transition, but we were there for a month. It was super fun.
And do you have any memorable experiences? What's a favorite place you visited?
Yeah, so this time it was very fun, because usually we stay in like Serbia for the most part. I've been to Crna Gora a couple more times because we went for like Ostrog and stuff, but this time we went down to Herceg Novi, and we stayed on the beach for like a week, and that was genuinely like one of the best experiences of my life. Like, it was so peaceful, it was so nice. So that was definitely a highlight. And then we also traveled through eastern Bosnia. We went to Visegrad, we went to Trebinje. We wanted to go through Sarajevo when visiting my like cousins. They don't live in Sarajevo, but we were like, okay, like we can find a way to include it into the trip, but then it ended up not working out. So that was my only regret, because I've really wanted to see Sarajevo, and my dad had been talking about it, like, oh, like I know, like I've been there, and like the what was it, the 1984 Winter Olympics.
Oh, yes.
He was like, oh, I can show you where everything. And I was like, okay, but that's definitely on my bucket list for the next time. But I think memorable experiences was definitely when we were, on the more, like on the beach and in Herceg Novi. And then we also took a trip, I think it was on our 4th day, like throughout basically the entire coast of Crna Gora. And it was really cool. and this goes back to the thing where it's like our parents' generation, obviously all of their experiences, like with the war and like whatever, they have different perspectives. But for me, kind of coming from the outside perspective, it was really cool when you get to Ulcinj, which is like on the very eastern coast of Montenegro.
Right next to Albania.
It's right next to Albania, and just how like if you travel through certain parts of like eastern Bosnia, there'll be like signs that are still in Cyrillic. All of the signs over there are in like Albanian, and I thought that was really cool because again, it shows that kind of like multiculturalness of the entire region, because it's Montenegro, but then there's also like a huge Albanian community there, and I thought that was really interesting to see.
Okay, so transitioning to our last few questions, what do you think about this Balkan diaspora, like building bridges and building peace in America? Like you kind of mentioned, like seeing the signs in different languages. I think that's like one form of like building bridges.
Yeah.
So in general, in the United States, what do you think about that idea?
I think there's steps being made, but a lot of it has to come from the diaspora community directly. I don't think it's going to come from our parents necessarily. You know what I mean? I don't want to call it like a lost generation, but I think it's just best to like for us to start that movement. And I know personally, I go to Barry Goldwater High School, and there's a lot of Balkan kids. Like one of the math classes has like three of us in there. Like it's like like there's a lot of us, and I think that's where it kind of starts, where it's like we need to make those moves to see those similarities, because I've seen both aspects. I've had there's a lot of Bosnians and Serbians specifically. There's not as many Croatians at my school, but like I remember even elementary school, like I was really, really good friends with like the Bosnian kids there. But then when I got to high school, that was the first time that I had been introduced to any sort of kind of like almost animosity. You know what I mean? Or like, you're this and I'm this, you know what I mean? But I think it has to start like organic, like from us being able to kind of like you mentioned earlier, yes, we're X ethnicity, but we're also American, you know, and realizing that we are not our parents and we are not our parents' experiences, I think that can get very tough, because I think our parents sometimes come here and they're like a little time capsule, because the people even over there have moved, for the most part. They have moved on, and like society has changed, and not just like in terms of like ethnic, like making peace, but even like lifestyle. Like one of the biggest thing that happened with my family is my dad is like really big about not being able to tell my parents that they're lying. Like you can never say that your parents are lying. But then when we went over there, like I think 2017, my cousin told my aunt like, oh, like you're lying, like why are you know, and my dad was like, whoa, you know, like so that was a big change. Like society over there has changed, but our parents here are almost like little time capsules, and it can get very difficult to not hold on to their beliefs with that idea of like, oh, I have to be Serbian, or I have to be Bosnian, or I have to be Croatian. So I think a lot of it needs to start with just like talking, acknowledging each other, and like realizing that we have a lot more in common than we do, you know, different. Like that's like a really big thing. Yeah, you get told all these stories and like, oh, like this happened during the war, but like at the end of the day, it's just a person, you know what I mean? Like you're not any different than I am just because you're this ethnicity. Maybe it's changed your experiences, but you're still human. I'm still a human. And I think being open to dialogue and being open to admitting that you might be wrong or your perspective might be biased, I think that's a big thing. I think it's like a whole like Balkan like spite, like I have to be right, I have to be proud of it. I think we kind of need to get rid of that and admit like, okay, our perspectives, our experiences might not be the most, I don't want to say honest, but the most like, it's not universal. And we have to be open to accepting that.
I think that is really, really important. Dialogue, like, it starts with our peers, our colleagues in the classroom, whether we're working with them, we're studying with them. I think dialogue is super important. And like you said, us Balkan people, we are proud. Yes. We have a lot of spite. And I think one of the first steps to dialogue is to overcome that and acknowledge that. I think that's something that has worked. Like, our spite has worked well for us, but it also is a hindrance to moving forward. And I agree with you that I think it's important to overcome that.
I think it's also important what we're telling other non-Balkan people.
Exactly.
I think that's also a thing where it's like, we spew this things just because it's like, we obviously have a much more dynamic understanding of the conflicts. And like, sometimes I might say something like as a joke, but I have to always remember, like, oh, well, they don't understand things as completely, like, sometimes I'll joke, like, I'll be like, Turkey, or, like, whatever. Like, I'll make a tiny joke like that, but then I have to remember, like, wait, that's, like, they don't understand where that's coming from and, like, what is exactly funny about that joke or, like, whatever. So I have to make sure that I'm not spreading misinformation or spreading my bias onto other people who are not familiar with the Balkans, right? So it's, like, remaining, like, very objective in viewing it and being like, hey, I'm Serbian, but that doesn't mean that my opinions on X, Y, and Z, or even on Serbia, are completely correct.
Changing that negative narrative amongst people who we talk about who are not from the Balkans, who don't know anything, I think that's really important. Like, in order to help change that negative narrative that's even in the that's been in the media for decades and whatnot, like, it starts with us. Like, and I guess with that, as you're graduating high school soon and moving on to begin college, how are you thinking about continuing to practice your Serbian culture and share your Serbian culture, since you said you want to potentially go out of state? How are you planning to keep your culture alive and to share it with other people who may not understand as much?
Exactly. I think, especially since I want to study international relations, I think that's where that Balkan perspective really does come in hand. And that's one of the main, I think you've experienced the same thing. That was one of the driving factors why I even, like, expressed interest in that, like, major, if you will, because it's like, oh, well, I come from an area that is filled with conflict, so might as well try to solve it. That was one of my things where I was like, well, I am American enough, so I think I could make it 4 years in, like, a very American university. But as I think the time has gotten closer to, like, college admissions and decisions and stuff, I've started to realize, like, damn, like, I actually need, like, a Serbian community, because I've never not been in a Serbian community. And that's something that I realized very soon. I was like, wait, there's so many of us here in Phoenix. I think I know what it's like to not be a part of it, but do I really? Because it influences such tiny aspects of my life, whether it's, like, every, like, August, like, all the Serbian moms somehow, like, share, like, peppers with one, like, they all just, like, send each other peppers. Like, tiny, like, silly examples like that. Like, it's always kind of influenced my life. So I've been trying to look at colleges or universities that at least have some sort of, if not Serbian, Slavic, or just, like, Eastern, I guess, communities. Because I feel like I find a weird way of navigating where I can relate to, like, Slavic cultures, but then I can also relate to almost, like, Arab cultures. So just, like, finding, like, more, like, Eastern communities, I guess, where I can find some kind of, like, identity in with, where I'm not just completely isolated. And that's been one of my goals, is just trying to find places, universities that expose me to that. Because I don't want to lose that. And especially if I want to continue the project, I need other Serbian people there. You know, I can't just, like, wing it by myself.
That's something because I originally had gone out of state, that's something I looked at. Like, when I was going to American University, I found that there was a Serbian church, like 30-minute Uber drive in Maryland. I went there a few times. It was expensive Uber rides. But that was the first time in my life I had not had pita for more than because my baba always makes it. I was like depressed. Like, I found a Bosnian store in Maryland. It was like on the last metro line. I took the metro. I walked a mile to the store. It wasn't even fresh, but it was like that kind you put in the oven. I bought it. I bought everything in that store because I was like, it's so important, because I was like, oh my god, like, I felt lost.
I was looking up, like, the Ivies, and I was, like, looking up, like, oh, okay, Connecticut is, like, obviously very small, so I wasn't really going into that Google search very hopeful that I was gonna find, like, a Serbian Orthodox, like, church or whatever, and then I found none, and I was like, wait, that might actually be a problem.
New York for the weekend.
Exactly, I was like, I'll just have to, like, book it to New York every weekend with the Uber, like you said.
Well, my last question, a fun one, is, I'm assuming, like, I know you listen to Balkan music.
I do.
So do you have a favorite song or artist right now?
I think, okay, I love Sanida, like, so much, like, just genuinely, like, I think I'm actually a fangirl. She posted something on Instagram, like, I think a month ago. She was performing in Toronto, but the theater was called the Phoenix Theater, and I, like, jumped out of my chair in my chemistry class, and then I read it, and I was like, wait, never mind. I really like her, and then I don't think I'm, like, unique about this, like, at all. I think it's just, like, a weird generational thing. I think a lot of our dads were, like, rock and roll. Like, they love...
My dad, I'm a rock and roll guy.
Yes, exactly, my dad, too. So, like, growing up, that was my little connection with my dad. Because I feel like my mom doesn't listen to music. Like, weirdly enough, like, she just doesn't... She, like, listens to music, but, like, not that she's like, oh, I love this artist. And I thought that was weird growing up, but so I connected a lot with my dad's taste in music, so I listened to a lot of, like, Bijelo dugme, Riblja čorba. I've kind of, like, found my own, like, path away from that, where it's not necessarily just what he listens to, so I listen to a lot of Ekaterina Velika. I think they were my number 2 artist. So I'm a really big fan of them. There's this other, like, band called, like, Xenia. They have one album, and they're on Spotify, and it's, like, a weird thing where it's, like, it's their album is tied to a different artist. But I like that album, and then, gosh, I don't know who else, but I love Ceca too.
Oh, of course.
Problematic
Queen.
Queen, you know.
I saw her this summer in Bosnia. It was
Oh my
great.
god. No, I love her. I think she has really, I think because her, like, what, her main writer was, like, Marina Tucaković. I love the little, like, info thing. I love, like, deep diving. But, like, her, like, it's like, okay, I love Lepa Brena, and I do not mean to, like, say anything bad about the queen at all, but, like, sometimes the lyrics are just, like, kind of, like, fun. Like, they're not very deep. And then, like, I think Ceca has that really good thing where it's, like, they're really deep, and they're, like, whoa, like, that's, like, there's a lot of substance to it, but it's also, like, a really good rhythm, and it sounds good.
Love the queen.
I know.